Hi, good morning, everyone. We are going to start in the next 3 minutes. We're just waiting for a few more attendees to join. Please have some patience with us. Thanks.
হ্যাঁ কোথায় শোনা যাচ্ছে?
Hi, I think we can get started. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our session, Providing Relief, Building Resilience, and the Role of Effective Social Protection for the Poor. This is one of our 5th sessions in the Charcha 2020 event, and also our last one. We have hosted the track of financial inclusion and hosted a lot of illustrious people to speak for us. So in this session today, I would just take some time to take you through what you can expect, introduce the participants, and then we can hand it over to the moderator. So just a few webinar rules before we get started. We have ensured, just to have no disruptions during the whole webinar, the chat is disabled and the audio and video are also off. But please feel free to use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. We have time set aside to take these up at the end of the panel. In case you're also having any challenges with your audio, just disconnect and rejoin. It usually works again. And we're also hosting the session live on the Quint on YouTube. So in case Zoom is challenging, you can always use that option. Sure, we can move ahead. So I just take this opportunity to introduce the panelists for today. So we have Dr. Muni Raju, who is the Deputy Advisor at Niti Aayog. We also have Ms. Shikha Srivastav, who is representing the Tata Trust. Can we move the slide ahead? Thank you. So Ms. Shikha Srivastav represents the Tata Trust, and she's heading the Urban Habitat and Migration portfolio. We have, moving on, we have Mr. Rajiv Kindelwal, co-founder and executive director of Ajivika Bureau. Moving on. Dr. Aditeshwar Seth joins us, and he's the co-founder and director at Grambani. We have Mr. Prabhat Lab. He's the CEO of Grameen Foundation India. So moving on. Yes, thank you. And finally, we have our host and moderator for this session, Mr. Ritesh Balakrishnan. Ritesh is the co-founder and managing partner at Satva, and I will give it over to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Mansi, and thank you everybody for joining the panel discussion today. We have 62 and counting, clearly, people that have joined us on a Saturday morning for this discussion. And after what has been two eventful and fairly rich days of discussion at Charcha. So thank you for taking the time for this discussion. I also want to sincerely thank all my panelists. They're amazing people who've done a lot of work in this conversation. I'm really, really happy to have the composition that we have in terms of a panel, of people who've really worked on this issue for decades on the ground and bring in experience that can make for an interesting conversation. The conversation for today is really around, social protection. We've had an entire track on financial inclusion, talking about gender, technology, MSMEs, etc. But one of the conversations that we really wanted to have was around social protection. And as all my panelists have told me in person that, these are two very large topics by themselves, the financial inclusion and social protection. But I think the focus on social protection is extremely critical, especially now, because in the light of the COVID crisis, there has been a lot of conversation on relief, and people have been talking about social protection as if it is a way of getting people to respond to this crisis most effectively. But the fundamental focus of social protection is actually to ensure that risks of such crisis, which happen more often than we can understand for the poor, are actually much lesser on the poor. So the idea really is to be able to see how we can help the poor way where the impact of such crisis is actually minimized. So rather than just being able to sort of mitigate the impact, it's actually be able to enable them to prevent the potential risks of this. And what the COVID crisis has really shown for us is two things. One is that the targeting of this social protection schemes to the poor, I think, is itself a challenge, and we've not been able to do a great job of that overall, just given the number and the size of the population that we have today. But the second big learning for us is the number of people who are pushed back into poverty because of the current crisis as well, where the thin thread that kept them above poverty today has been cut because of the crisis of poverty. And in the light of this, what we want to do is to essentially talk about social protection, not just from a lens of providing relief, which I think is critical, but really from a focus on building resilience and how that can be achieved. One of the things that we were very mindful of when we put this panel together is that it is always easy to abstract this problem as a conceptual problem or as a data problem when we talk about it in a panel, and however much you try, it is extremely hard to get a real sense of how hard is this problem today, because I think our collective imagination of the problems people face here is actually limited. So to really set the context for this panel, what we did today was to put together a montage of videos from the ground of actual people who are suffering because of this crisis. Because rather than us talking about them, we really wanted to have them talk about themselves and the problems that they are facing on the ground. It is a 10-minute video, and I'd request each of you to take the time to see it, and we will start the discussion on the panel after that video is complete. And before we begin, I really want to thank our partners, People Archives of Rural India, PARI, India Relief Collaborative that we worked with, who connected us to people in Delhi, and to Gramvani, who've been responsible for us to get these voices from the ground. Team, if you can just start the video now, please, so that all of us can see it.
हम लोग ड्यूटी के लिए निकले, तो ड्यूटी के लिए निकले तो हम साइट पे गए। तो वहाँ पे साइट पे वो लोग बोला कि आज काम होगा और कल जो है संडे से बंद रहेगा, लॉकडाउन के लिए वो लोग बोला बंद रहेगा 1 दिन के लिए। फिर हम लोग नाइट में जो है कि काम करके शनिवार को आधा टाइम से ही चले आए, क्योंकि 12 बजे यानी कि बाद से जो चालू होने वाला था। तो हम 12 बजे से पहले ही बोर्ड गिट लगा दिए वहाँ पे, पूरा जो है चारों तरफ से बंद करने तो यानी पूरा कवर कर दिए, पूरा सेफ्टी वाले आए लोग, पूरा वो जो है कि बंद करा दिए ताकि अंदर में कोई ना जाए आए और कुछ ऐसा हो ना। आके सो गए। उसके बाद से सुबह फिर जो है ड्यूटी के लिए प्रोग्राम बना, साइट पे गया आदमी मगर नहीं काम किया, लोग घूम के चले आए।
23 तारीख को लॉकडाउन बंद होने का था, तो उस दिन मैं साहब से बोला कि रोड में पुलिस मार रहा है, ये कर रहा है, वो कर रहा है। तो वो बोला कि जाओ लेकर जाओ, लोड करके मैं गाड़ी अभी लोडे गाड़ी खड़ा है। मैं लेकर किसी तरह आया, उधर से आया, सवेरे बंद हो गया। तो उस समय एक बार खुराकी पैसा था हम लोग के पास, राशन पता ही अपना खरीद के खा रहे थे, किसी वो भाई से, किसी वो भाई मेरे से, किसी वो भाई अपने में मिल कर काम चला रहे थे। कोई यहाँ देखने वाला नहीं था। पेमेंट भी वो अगला महीना में 7,000 डाला, 20,000 पेमेंट है, उसमें 7,000 मिला। इसके बाद ये महीना का कुछ भी नहीं मिला।
अगर मान लीजिए कि थोड़े से इधर से हम लोग को कंपनी से लोग निकाल देते हैं, हम लोग कंपनी से बाहर भी चले जाएं, कंपनी पे रोड पे जा रहे हैं तो पुलिस मार रही है, कंपनी में आ रहे हैं तो कंपनी वाले भगा रहे हैं। हम लोग 2600-2700 किलोमीटर से दूर से आए हैं, किधर जाएंगे?
15 दिन से मालिक एक बार आके नहीं इधर पूछा भी तुम्हारा क्या हाल है क्या नहीं, मालिक एक बार नहीं आया।
तो सब तो किसानी झेलता है ना, सब तो वर्कर झेलता है, बाकी लोग तो अपने घर में बैठे रहते हैं।
गाँव तक जाने के लिए ट्रेन भी नहीं चलता है बाइक के लिए, वो चलेगा, हम पेमेंट दे सकते हैं तो हम कैसे भी देख कर हम गाँव चल जाएंगे। उसमें गाँव जाए कि उसमें मन चीज़ें ना।
तो तुम्हें किसी चीज़ से डर है?
डर है ना, घर से घर गाँव में रहते मरेगा तो कोई दिक्कत नहीं, इधर रहेगी मरेगा तो कोई देखेगा नहीं ना। तो गांव में देखे अभी 7 महीना हुआ, तो कोई देखा नहीं है, गांव जाने का
They are footloose. They are made to move from one side to another, like a highway in Hyderabad one day, and then a tunnel in Rohtang the other day, then the Bangalore metro the other day. We have asked workers, do they know where they live, and most often don't know if they are in the south or north of Bangalore. The other day we had one of the workers talking to us and asking if he decided to walk home from here to Jharkhand, as to what the next state is. Many of their families are as concerned about their health and want them to return home as they are mighty aware that there is no way you can manage social distancing with 800 odd workers sharing rooms with 4 bathrooms. The employer's attitude is one of ignorance towards the life of the workers outside the construct of him as a constructor, as a builder, as a mestri or something like that. They mostly care about the amount of hours he can put in labor, period.
काम चीज नहीं हमारा।
मेरा पति काम पे जाता था, वही स्टॉप हो गया।
बहुत तकलीफ
3 बच्चे हैं, वो कूली काम करते हैं मैडम।
मजूरी
2 हफ्ते से घर पे ही है मैडम। एक हफ्ते में एक बार तो संडे के दिन मिलता था। संडे के दिन इतना ही 5 किलो चावल लाके 1 किलो शक्कर लाके जिंदगी करते थे, वही स्टॉप हो गया। 2 हफ्ते से नहीं मिल रहा है। थोड़ा बहुत आता है, थोड़ा बहुत लोगों को नहीं पहुंचा रहा है, थोड़ा बहुत नहीं
4 जने 3 जने 5 जने देता, सब लेके जाता। बहुत मुसीबत है, मजूरी नहीं है, क्या नहीं। अब भाड़ा आया, कैसा बनना, सब जने बैठ कर खाते कैसा होता। बच्चे है, ऐसा चल रहा है हमारा भी तकलीफ है।
थोड़ा बहुत आता है, सभी को नहीं पहुंच रहा है।
4 आदमी देता, लेके जाता। 100 आदमी के ऊपर है, पूरा देने को तो सबको लाओ, नहीं तो नहीं।
मैंने एक बेनिफिशियरी से बात करी और बात करते हुए उन्होंने बताया कि उनके पास राशन कार्ड तो है, पर वो राशन कार्ड एक ऊंची जाति के आदमी ने रख लिया है और वो इन बेनिफिशियरी के राशन कार्ड पर राशन लेके अपने हिसाब से इन्हें देता है। यही सिस्टम है उनकी कॉलोनी में। तो ये भी हमारे देश की एक दर्दनाक सच्चाई है कि आज भी जाति के नाम पर भेदभाव होता है, और ये जातिवाद आज कोरोना वायरस के टाइम में खास करके और भी ज़्यादा दर्दनाक हो गया है।
मी 2:30 वाजता 250 रुपयाची भाजी घेते। दररोज माझे 400 रुपये होतात। दोघांमध्ये 400 रुपये होतात। मी सकाळी 6ला उठते आणि नंतर मी भाजीला विकायला जाते। नंतर भाजी घराघरांनी विकून मग येतो आम्ही घरात। मग घरामध्ये थांबलो ना थोडंसं, अजून थोडंसं भाजी विकायला जातो। थोडीशी संपली नाही तर दुसऱ्या बोळ्याने जातो। सगळ्या बोळ्याने जातात। मग एक कोणी घेतलं, कोणी नाही, तर कोणी सगळेच घेतात, तर कोणी नाही घेत। सकाळी 5:30ला भाजी आणावं लागते। भाजीमध्ये काही जे भेटेल ते आणावं लागते। भेटल्यावर मग ते इकडं आणून विकावं लागते। जे घेतात ते घेतात, खूप जण घेतात, खूप जण घेत नाहीत। आणि अभ्यास करायला थोडंच वेळ भेटते। सकाळी पुन्हा दुपारी थोडं जेवतो, पुन्हा करतो, पुन्हा अभ्यासाला बसतो। पुन्हा शाळेत जायला खूप आवडते मला, मान खूप दुखते।
दूसरे प्रदेश में फंसे मजदूर से जब यहाँ उनके नाम के बैंक खाते सहायता राशि भेजने के लिए मांगे जा रहे हैं तो वो बता रहे हैं कि उनके नाम से कोई बैंक खाता ही नहीं। अपनी जगह पर वे अपने रिश्तेदारों के बैंक अकाउंट नंबर आवेदन में डाल दे रहे हैं। दरअसल बड़ी संख्या में मजदूरों ने नाम पता तो अपना दिया है, लेकिन अकाउंट नंबर अपने संबंधियों का दे दिया, क्योंकि उनके अपने नाम से बैंक खाता ही नहीं। सरकारी स्तर पर जब नाम व बैंक खाता मिलान किया जा रहा तो वो मैच ही नहीं करता। इससे आवेदन रिजेक्ट हो जाता है। यही नहीं, ऐसे मजदूरों की ओर से दोबारा ऑनलाइन आवेदन भरने पर वह सबमिट ही नहीं होता। यानी एक बार जिसका आवेदन खारिज हो गया वह दोबारा आवेदन कर ही नहीं सकता। श्रम अधीक्षक विनय कुमार ने बताया कि जिन श्रमिकों का नाम पता व अकाउंट नंबर मिल गया उनके खाते में राशि चली गई, लेकिन जिनके नाम पते व अकाउंट नंबर मैच नहीं हुए, वे आवेदन रिजेक्ट हो गए। इसलिए उन्होंने तमाम प्रवासी मजदूरों से अपील की है कि वे अपने सगे संबंधी की जगह अपना अकाउंट नंबर ही डालें ताकि उन्हें सरकारी सहायता उपलब्ध कराई जा सके। यह समस्या दिल्ली, बेंगलुरु व सूरत समेत दूसरे कई प्रदेशों में फंसे मजदूरों के साथ आ रही है।
And riding back to Orissa from Mumbai. So one of those stories was on the microfinancing institutions, which are supposed to provide financial support to those who want to start something of their own. They particularly lend money to laborers, small-time farmers, and many of them are women, because banks mostly do not entertain them because they lack any kind of collateral. Even after the lockdown began, some of the borrowers with the microfinancing companies told me that they are calling them, harassing them to pay up the installments. This at a time when there is absolutely no work and no money. The families I spoke to belong to Usmanabad district in Maharashtra. It is one of the districts of the Marathwada region, which has seen several farm suicides over the past decade or so. The families told me that the desperation to get some cash in hand is so acute that people had deluged local banks to withdraw $500 that the finance minister announced to women Jan Dhan accounts.
तो गाजीपुर मोबाइल वाणी में आपका स्वागत है। आपका नाम क्या है? मुन्ना राम। आप करते क्या हैं? नरेगा में काम करते हैं। नरेगा में काम करते हैं। तो ये बताइए, अब नरेगा में काम करते हैं तो ये लॉकडाउन को लेकर के जो बैठकी हुई है उसमें आपको इस समय नरेगा का काम तो लगभग हर जगह चल रहा है, तो क्या आपको काम मिला है? हाँ, इस समय मिला है। 2 दिन से काम कर रहे हैं। 2 दिन से काम कर रहे हैं। तो ये बताइए, जैसे पहले भी आप काम करते थे? पहले भी काम करते थे। लॉकडाउन से जो है कि हम इसमें बहुत हम लोग की परेशानी हुई थी। अच्छा। तो ये बताइए, जैसे मान लो आप काम करते हैं तो आपको खाते में जो है सही ढंग से पैसा आ जाता है? हाँ, आ जाता है। काम करने पर आ जाता है। जैसे नरेगा वालों को लेकर के सरकार जो है व्यवस्था दी थी, जैसे 1000 रुपया देने के लिए और 5 किलो यूनिट दर पे राशन लेने के लिए कही थी, क्या आपको मिला है? हाँ, राशन मिला है। फ्री में मिला है। अच्छा। तो आप इस समय नरेगा में काम पा करके कैसा महसूस कर रहे हैं? खुशहाल हैं हम लोग। खुशहाल हैं।
A lady from Rajendra Nagar constituency, Delhi, with a family of 7 members, was working as a maid and her husband was a daily wage laborer. They don't have a ration card, so they were not able to get ration from PDS shop. Through this initiative, along with the financial support of Rs 2500, with the help of the Delhi government, we helped family with the dry ration as well. Let's come together to lend a smile on those faces who require help in this pandemic situation.
Thanks, Chaitanya. Thank you so much for putting this together. And again, for us, this was extremely important to start with the voices from the ground, because it is in the service of those people that these conversations happen. And it's extremely important to remind ourselves on a day-to-day basis and a session-to-session basis to anchor ourselves to this reality very clearly. And I just want to maybe make a few points that I captured from the video that I think will frame the discussion going forward as well. Number one, for us, COVID seems to be like an unprecedented crisis. It's changed our lifestyle significantly. But the idea of a crisis is not so unnatural for a lot of the people that we are talking to. Farmer suicides are not a once in a 10-year phenomenon. And a lot of the lockdowns that happen or disruptions in work that happen in the cities for migrants is not a once in a 10 years phenomenon. That's number one. Number two is, despite all the best intentions, reach to the services or the benefits that we provide is still very, very hard. There is the caste divide. There is the logistics challenge. There is other notions of paperwork that actually keep people away from what we want to create and provide to them. 3 is agency of the people who really need to avail these benefits is still very low. It is still a very, and somebody once told me, a Raja Praja format. We are Rajas giving people things that they have to take and use, rather than them having the empowerment and the right and the ability and the agency to be able to take some of these benefits that are rightfully theirs. And targeting is a massive challenge. As one of the ladies said, there are 100 women, there are food for 5 or 6 people. And hence, even our ability to target people, even when we know where they are, is still a huge challenge. Having said all of this, there are parts and pockets where things are working well. As that gentleman talked about Narega, there are places where solutions are working. But I think one of the things that we have to find out and solve as part of the conversation here, but as our constant endeavor, is to be able to see how can we solve these problems at scale. And I do hope that our conversation today with all of these panelists, in some sense, cover the span not just of the problem, but really this, that there are things that are working. How do we take them to scale? And what have we learned from all of these experiences? I want to first invite Rajiv Kandelwal. Rajiv, if I could request you to share your experiences. Rajiv, you've had about 2 decades of experiences working with migrants. And both through Ajivika Bureau and Shram Sarath, you've tried a lot of ideas and solutions. If you could share your experiences on both the challenge and some of the solutions that you've seen work, I think that will be great to start with. And we can keep it about 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to have me on this platform. A very moving video, I must say, and congratulations to the Pari team and their collaborators, Gramvani. What you see is real, and I think we need to be reminded that for large numbers of urban informal workers, migrant workers, the reality is a very here and now one. It is not a conceptual kind of reality, it is what they experience. Let us keep in mind that for vast number of people, wages in cities are appallingly low. Almost 45 to 50% of all people have no guarantee to minimum wages. Even if they do, then the work hours are extremely long. For what they earn and what they have to spend on essential survival in cities, the gap is way too large, which is why people are forced to live in very arduous kind of conditions in congested spaces, often sleeping on in open areas and on pavements, or buying expensive food from the market, foregoing healthcare, health treatment, even if kind of situations so arise. One of the strong propositions that is making itself clear is that public provisioning for informal workers and migrant workers has to kick in, because people are unable to purchase it from the market. It is important that social investment is considered legitimate in providing food, healthcare, housing, habitation to informal workers and to migrant workers in cities. I say this because it is the availability of cheap labor, of migrant cheap labor, that encourages industry to basically focus on hiring in cheaply rather than focusing on productivity of workers. If there were to be adequate investments in these essential things like food and housing and healthcare, it would benefit productivity itself. And I think what we've learned is that wherever work conditions are better, the people who gain is everybody. It's not just the workers. It is also about industry gaining. Usually, the argument is made around targeting. I feel that the big solution now lies in universalizing, in not bothering with identifying who is more deserving than the other, but in accepting broadly that the Indian workforce in cities needs provisioning. It needs PDS, it needs healthcare, it needs subsidized housing. And I think if we were to focus on at least these 3, it would make a very powerful difference to the lives of people and what they're able to save and take back to the villages. Let us remember, these are not people who are there to settle permanently in cities. They are temporary people. They will go back. They're not trying to stake a permanent claim in cities. For them, village is their home. While we focus on food and health and so on, I think what is also becoming pressing and important, and you heard this in the video as well, is some discussion and some real focus on guaranteeing wages. It is no longer good to talk about giving people cheap food. I think employment being the primary reason for people's presence and missing out on it because of either willful default or outright kind of denial of wages by employers or contractors. It is important for state and industry to create funds that guarantee people a minimum basic income regardless of their tenure, regardless of their location. We should not use domicile as a alibi for denying people what is essentially owed to them. The idea of an urban guarantee, of urban work guarantee, is gaining ground, and I think we need to kind of go deeper into that discussion to see how we can apply it to people who are in cities from other states, from other parts of the country, and who deserve this. If these things were to be available when the lockdown was announced, do you think this exodus would have happened? It would not have. It would have been contained. I think people would have taken made more considered choices in their exiting the city. They would have had more faith in being looked after. The fact is that there were none of these things available. Their informality at work extends to their life in the city, which is why there is no confidence in people that they would be looked after or protected when a crisis is kind of breaking out. So I argue for universality. I argue for ending informality. I argue for guaranteeing wages to workers who are in the cities. Otherwise, we will just get back to business as usual whenever things ease out and the lockdown becomes better again. Thank you.
Yeah. Rajiv, thank you so much. I think it's a great way to start. And I want to kind of highlight 3 things I picked up from what you said, which I think it'd be good to come back to. I think one is the framework in some sense that you highlighted about the food, housing, and healthcare as the minimum sort of requirement in terms of public provisioning. I think is a great place to start in some sense to think about how we even look at protection overall for urban migrants. The second is, I think, the point about targeting versus universalization. I think it is at the heart of our social protection debate. I think there are biases and thoughts around that, and I think talking about that is, I think, critical. The third part you talked about guaranteeing wages, I think is important, and I think I want to broaden that when we come to the Q&A to talk also about the role of the employer. When we talk in the formal sector, we talk about cost to company as including many other things, etc. But when we talk about informal workers, that, in some sense, there is an abdication of that responsibility. And by guaranteeing wages and looking at what is the role of the employer, I think it's an important part for us to talk about as well. So thanks for bringing this up, Rajiv. I want to move next to Shika. Shika, you, as part of the Tata Trust, you've worked many years on the challenges of the urban poor. You've been partners with Ajivika Bureau as well. You've also built, in some sense, a 3-fold model for Tata Trust. It'd be great to hear your thoughts, Shika, on this particular challenge and key areas that you think we should focus on as solutions.
Yeah, thank you, Ratish, and thanks for organizing this very timely and relevant discussion. I must say COVID-19 and the lockdown has stirred our collective conscience, and it's about time it did, but I was hoping not in these circumstances. The crisis has actually held up a mirror to us and brought to our attention a huge section of our population, of our urban population, whom we hitherto took for granted. So you work for us, we don't give you any rights, we don't care how you live. So basically that was how it was, and it was business as usual. I read somewhere on social media, for once it captured the essence of today's situation very well. It said COVID and the lockdown actually didn't cause any system breakdowns. It actually exposed a broken system. A system which excluded a large section of the urban poor from basic rights, amenities, as Rajiv pointed out earlier, and also from participation in urban governance. no recognition, no ownership by the cities where they live and work in. I would like to bring in a disclaimer here that when we talk about urban poor, let's not look at them as an uniform category. There are categories of urban poor within this whole section of urban poor that we're talking about. And today, the most affected and the ones who need the most assistance are the ones who are the most vulnerable. And that's where I think what Rajiv said, and I totally agree with him about targeted interventions, looking at and specifically addressing the needs of those. And when it comes to migrants, and especially when I talk about migrants, I'm talking about the short-term and the seasonal migrants into cities who are the most vulnerable. So they have vulnerabilities which range from residential, occupational to social, a gamut of vulnerabilities. And as you know, and these get highlighted, these get aggravated many times more when they move from their source locations to destinations. So what is actually required, and I would like speak about this with reference to our work. We've worked in the space of migration with internal migrants now for more than 14 years. And while our work and the portfolio that I handle looks at both urban poor and internal migrants, I think there are quite a few overlaps, but they need targeted specific interventions for the categories of migrants that I mentioned before. In terms of the urban poor, absolutely necessary that they should have access to basic services and affordable housing. And these should go together. It should be housing. And when we are talking about housing, it should not just talk about home ownership. And I was very happy to hear when the FM spoke a couple of days back about looking at rental housing models for migrants coming into cities, because this is one area that really needs our cities and our state governments and our national governments to focus on, as well as a very big responsibility of employers, especially employers from the informal sector. So for the urban poor, focus on basic services, urban housing, and the second part is their participation in urban governance. The urban poor should have a say in what the city is planning for them, a recognition by the destination cities that the migrants who work for them are citizens of the city, have a right in whatever form we can give them to decide and to plan how they live and where they live. So that's when we are talking about the whole, the whole umbrella of the urban poor, broadly what. But for migrants specifically, what we've been doing at the Trust and over the years through our work with partners like Ajivika Bureau and others, and also with our own teams that we've been doing work in the source and destination safe, we feel that the solution or some of the solution lies in interventions that addressed all or at least most of the vulnerabilities that migrants face at the destination. And these range from providing them access, the solutions cover access to entitlements and benefits, financial inclusion, very important. The video told us that while yes, there are benefits that are transferred into bank accounts, most do not, or at least even if they do not have functional bank accounts. Financial inclusion for them, not just to access benefit, but also for remittances. Financial inclusion include financial services and financial literacy. And the third thing is reducing their occupational vulnerability, improving working condition for sectors which employ a large number of migrants who work in construction sites, migrants who work in bricklaying, migrants who work in other hazardous occupations. How can employers step in and provide better working conditions and ensure that workers who are working for them have access to their entitlements and benefits? These are models that we've tried out. We worked on construction site, on site with employers. We've set up centers called migrant resource centers where in migration prone areas. So all of these, I think, are part of the solution that we should be looking at, both in the short term and long term going forward. Interventions, I would again emphasize, that are holistic and that involve multiple stakeholders, including government and the employers.
Got it. Thank you, Shikha. And I think what I want to come back to again in the Q&A is really about, when you talked about urban governance models, I think that, is a very, very critical point. And I think one of the challenges really has been in the how. It'd be great to hear from you. What are some of the things that you've tried, or suggestions or recommendations you have on how we can make that happen? Because I think that's, and establishing that, and what we talked earlier about the agency, I think is a very, very critical point. And the point you made about rental housing, and I agree with you. I think figuring out housing and essentially providing any form of, not even if not permanence, credibility to the space that they are living in, credence, I think will go a long way. So thanks for bringing that up. I want to shift to Adi. Adi, there was Dr. Aditya Shah. There has been a conversation on entitlements and delivery. And one of the areas that you've actually worked in is in capturing data through technology and understanding some of the challenges of the last mile in terms of delivery of entitlements. It'll be great to hear your thoughts on what have been some of the challenges, across Narega, Jandan, PM Kisan, etc., across various schemes.
Yeah, hi everybody, and thanks so much for having me. So I completely echo points that Rajiv and Shikha and everybody has raised, right? That basically it's not that the system broke down during the pandemic, right? But on the contrary, it actually did respond very well to whatever best extent it could. But there were all these problems right from the beginning, right? So in the same way, just like with migrants in the cities, even in the rural areas, we've had very similar issues. Right, with exclusions on ration cards. So, for example, many genres and group have estimated that about 10 crore households should have ration cards, but they don't, and that's largely because the ration card lists haven't been updated properly. The processes around that have been broken. So, during the pandemic, interim measures kicked in, right? That many panchayats started doing surveys to bring in more families. In Bihar, Jivika, which is the self-help group network, they started doing this enumeration through the self-help group. So those sort of positive steps were taken. But in general, the problems that people were facing with access to ration was very, very big. We were just flooded with some of these issues, and our teams on the ground then helped respond and get ration to these families. Similarly, with cash transfers, the same sort of issues also we came across, that with PM Kisan, many people who had applied hadn't still gotten their enrollment. Similarly, with Jandhan and Ujjwala gas subsidy and with pension, there have been all these other problems with Aadhaar seeding, names being spelled incorrectly, because of which sometimes the KYC failed and then these accounts got deactivated. Adding to it, so of course, cash has been one of the biggest issues, right? Access to cash, and the whole banking infrastructure has also been very overloaded. So that's been yet another issue on physical infrastructure, that people have had to actually physically go to the banks. And that leads to so many other issues because, there's overcrowding that happens. Sometimes there's technological problems of the internet not working at banks and people have to come back empty-handed. Business correspondent networks have banking correspondents, right? That again is not uniformly available. So in places it's worked where there were banking correspondents and kiosks, customer service kiosks in many places to get further deeper into rural areas. But again, it's not a uniform story of success. Yet another big issue we saw was just on financial literacy itself. So in fact, there have been some stories we've come across where people have alleged that the banking correspondents, they've been taking extra money from the people. So with saying things like, well, your Aadhaar linkage is broken, it will cost you 150 for us to fix that, right? Or your bank is inactive, it will cost you 100 rupees to fix that. And even in terms of, so in many cases, some of these withdrawals have actually happened, but people didn't get the cash because the banking correspondent basically said that, well, it didn't work. But whatever, right? There were some technical problems at the back end because of which the money actually has been debited from their accounts, but people never saw the cash. So there's a big problem of financial literacy also over here, and technology that can be designed appropriately so that the customers, the users are kept in the loop in some way, so that it is not just that the banking correspondent, or in the case of PDS, a ration dealer, they're able to just bluff their way through. So there's many issues, and these have been systemic issues. They've been highlighted for a long time. The pandemic has really brought them much more and sharper visibility. But that's where I think we need to start, right? By understanding some of these systemic flaws and then plugging the gaps and especially starting with removing exclusion errors, because that's very dominant.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm just going to call you Adi. It's just a lot easier. Thank you, Adi, and thanks for sharing that. And
absolutely.
I think going back to the point about exclusion errors, and I think that's one of the things, again, when we talk about universalization and so on, it's just that the cost of targeting and the impact of exclusion is so much higher. And one of the things, again, I want to bring back in the Q&A is really this question of what does it take to universalize? Is that even the right approach for us, and how do we do that effectively? And a lot of the last mile problems that you talked about, which is really in terms of names being spelled wrongly, and what that could mean in the current context is, I think, a very pressing sort of reality. And I just want to move from here to Prabhat as well. Prabhat, as part of the Grameen Foundation work, I think one of the things that you've actually done is the Unconditional Cash Transfer Program in Bihar. And I'm sure there's been a lot of learning from that, and I'd love to hear from you what has been the experience of that. What are some of the lessons from the ground on what works and what are some of the challenges?
Sure. Thanks, Ratish, and good morning, everyone. It was kind of fantastic to hear from Rajiv, from Shikha, and from Adi, and I was just taking note of some of the really good points that they were making. I'll come to some of them. But coming to the question that you asked about this unconditional cash transfer program that Grameen Foundation has started in one district in Bihar. So basically, we, first of all, a disclaimer that, we are absolute firm believers in the need for a universal basic income kind of thing that, is, as a welfare state, that's something that we have to assure for everyone. If we want to be called ourselves as a developed country, in the making, for a $5 trillion economy, we can't be developed unless the poorest and the most vulnerable person can, have the same opportunities, can, feed his or her family, can have the same health and education opportunities that the rest of us can have. So that's why the need for universal basic income is firm. Now, universal basic income is something that the state has to provide. Now, when the state does something, when the government does something, it does something for everyone, but it can't take care of the nuanced needs of different segments, that Shikha was talking about, that there are different segments, within urban poverty, within rural. So for us, because we are a small organization, we set out to find that, okay, in India, we have fantastic digital payment platforms like PMJDY, Aadhaar seeded accounts, digital payments infrastructure, which can be leveraged to transfer funds to people very quickly. Only if we know whom to transfer the funds to, if it is not a universal type, and if we wanted to have that nuanced focus on people who are most vulnerable. So we then set out to develop a kind of vulnerability index, which takes into account not just economic indicators, but also social parameters, like, is the family having somebody who's disabled? Is the family in a kind of employment or livelihood which is vulnerable, like migrant workers who lost their livelihoods, or informal sector workers who can't earn anything at this point of time? Or is there somebody in the family who is suffering from a chronic disease? Or is there an orphan child in the house, or a single parent households? Are there disabled people? Are there old age people in the household or abandoned by the families, as we find in many villages? So we kind of took all of these factors into account and built this vulnerability index. And it's like a mobile application. So our field workers on the ground collect client profile data. And then this algorithm kind of tells you that, okay, these people are likely to be most vulnerable, and recommends them for an unconditional cash transfer. And this recommendation is then reviewed by a selection committee. And why that selection committee comes into place, we could have done entire thing absolutely automated, is that we don't want to have many instances of false negative, that a really deserving person or household gets left out. We're not so worried about false positive. That right now we have so many people who have been affected by this situation. So then the selection committee makes the meets and looks at all the profiles, both the recommended ones and the non-recommended ones by the application, and then makes a decision, and then we use the banking channel to send an unconditional cash transfer to the households. Now, of course, it's a small initiative because we are a small, non-profit. But there's something really that the governments can do, and other donors can look at this kind of model to really scale it up. You have the huge infrastructure of state livelihood missions in almost all the states who have self-help groups. You have microfinance institutions. So just leverage that network to do this vulnerability identification, and then you can kind of leverage the digital payments infrastructure to send benefits to people. I did want to make a couple of more points, which is about if you look at the situation, what makes poor people so vulnerable at this point of time. Rajiv talked about I think the issue of wages, and we have things like minimum wage, which of course is absolutely inadequate, but it also doesn't cover a huge majority of our workforce. So agricultural labor is out of the purview of your minimum wage regime. Your self-employed people who constitute more than half of your workforce does not fall under minimum wages because they don't have an identifiable employer. So that's a problem. Then you also have the problem of urban poverty versus rural poverty, and in last few decades, the nature of our poverty has shifted drastically from rural to urban as well. So now we have urban poverty being an equally big phenomena. However, our solutions are more focused even on the rural areas even today, like Manrega kind of scheme. So you have hundreds of millions of migrant workers in the cities. How do they benefit from this Manrega kind of scheme? Rajiv talked about a point about the workers, the migrants having this lack of faith or trust. So I think we have really kind of failed our people in terms of giving them the faith, the reassurance that we as a society, we as an employer, we as a state are with them, behind them, and there's nothing to worry. It's just a short period of time and the crisis will go over. So I think that faith, the trust is very important. And one final point I'll make it is about reiterating the point that Adi made about the need for financial literacy. We have 32 crore PMJDY accounts. And I was told that all of those accounts are supposed to come with an overdraft facility of 5,000 rupees, which is supposed to actually increase to 10,000 rupees. Now, in a crisis time like this, why a mechanism like that has not been used? I mean, I don't have any information how many people have actually availed that kind of opportunity. That clearly shows you about the lack of awareness, lack of information people have about a tool or a benefit that they already have in their hands, which they can leverage. I live in Gurgaon, and I was meeting some of the migrant people who were trying to walk all the way from here to Bihar to Jhansi in UP, and they were saying that we used to, of course, we can't work, we can't earn, but also we used to get stuff on credit from our local Kirana store, and they are refusing to give us things on credit, so we can't eat. Now, imagine if a small credit was made available to that Kirana store or to these migrant workers using the system that already exists, then we would not have been in such a situation of despair. So I think, any system is only as good as it can function in the worst of the times and the situation of crisis. Only system is as good as people are aware about it and have the capacity to, the confidence and the trust to use it. So those are kind of some of things, learnings that we are coming up with this in this situation. Thank you. Hello.
I believe Ratish is facing some challenge with the audio. He'll just rejoin shortly.
While we are waiting for Ratish to dial back, perhaps I can use the opportunity to make one more point, which is about the contradiction between the kind of problems that we have and the kind of solutions that we are offering. So we know that India is now largely a services sector economy. Services account for 60% of our GDP now, over 60%. And if you look at the announcements being made in last 3 days, the majority of them are actually talking about, let's say, loans to MSMEs, loans to microfinance institutions. Now, there are some problems that can be solved by loans. But when, let's say, there's a hairdresser and he or she has lost their wages, lost their earning for a day or a month because they could not work, you can't recoup that lost wage because it's gone. Services sector, services come with that perishability. A service that could not be sold today can't be sold tomorrow, unlike products, which if you can't sell your veggies today, perhaps you might be able to sell it tomorrow. So in that sense, our solutions need to take into account the kind of problem we have, the change in the employment scenario, that now a majority of people are employed in the informal sector, in the services sector, and how do you cater to their vulnerabilities and needs? So I'll pause there. I hope Ratish has been able to dial back.
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Prabhat. Sorry, I was there. I was out for about 15 seconds. But again, I want to come back to a lot of what you mentioned during our Q&A as well, Prabhat, because I think you're making a couple of very interesting points, especially I think the role of the MSME, and which is really the service entrepreneurs rather than just those that are producing. And I think what are the ways in which we can extend our social protection lens to them as well? And how does that look like rather than just individuals, families, or migrants? I think is an important point as well. I want to come to Dr. Muniraju. Muniraju, sir, thank you so much for joining. I know from a Niti Ayog's point of view, financial inclusion and social protection is a very critical priority. There has been a lot of focus on direct benefit transfer, direct cash transfers, etc. It'll be great to hear from you, of course, where we are today, which I think there is a lot of literature on, but also what do you see as a roadmap or some of the priorities going forward as well? And in some sense, the response to the current crisis from the state as well, sir. I think that could be a great place to start. Sir, you're on mute. If you can unmute yourself. Yes.
Thank you, Ratish, and others. They have really come up with the factual information, what is happening on the ground. And definitely it's an eye-opener for all the policymakers as well as the implementing agencies, maybe from the district administrations to the state government and the national government. And definitely, see, we have not left anyone to suffer. We are making all needed efforts to meet the requirements of the people. But unfortunately, there are some issues. People should rely on the government's initiatives, and every school, if you take in Delhi and surrounding areas, every state government is closely working and taken all the needed initiative to provide food. At least minimum basic food is supplied in every school, buildings, and the institutional areas. They have opened up, and we have requested almost all civil society organizations in the country, and whatever the requirements are there for the feeding the people, that we have come up with a subsidized distribution of food grains to the NGOs and with lower amount. And including this, maybe we have brought to the notice of Honorable Prime Minister, because based on the demand from civil society organizations to reduce the food grains rates for NGOs, that maybe shortly it is going to be implemented, and it is in the pipeline. It is going to come down to 10 rupees per kilo for rice and wheat, and free distribution in the PDS system. This initiative has already been taken, and we have instructed all PDS shops to distribute based on food grains to all the people who can able to cook and have the meals. And similarly, all government agencies in the district administration to ensure for providing food to the migrant laborers or destitutes or whoever required the food, cooked meals. And you know that there are a lot of big organizations like Akshay Patra. You may be aware that every day they are cooking 15 lakh million meals to the people, and they're freely distributing, because there are a lot of corporates are engaged with them. And we in Niti Ayog, we have almost 92,000 civil society organizations, which are capable organizations, in fact, with credible information. We have registered with us, and corporate funding also, CSR funding, what you call, that is also we are insisting, and we are coming with relaxed norms for the CSR funding, and also for FCRA norms. In fact, Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, there are a lot of pushes going on to ensure that that every organization gets some funding and help the people who are drastically in trouble because of the lockdown. And these are measures that we have taken because we want to ensure that
the spread of the coronavirus has to be stopped with all attention and with all force, so that we can stop the spread of virus, and we can ensure that these cases should not increase more than what we expect. And all public institutions, in fact, for that matter, are closely working, and district administrations as well as the local administrations at the block level and even panchayat level institutions, we have asked them to ensure that the both as well as the awareness generation or feeding the people or providing the basic health facilities. Yes, definitely I too come across, because we interact regularly with many civil society organizations, that there are some issues relating to general healthcare is concerned. But because the attention is more on COVID, because the number of cases, death cases are increasing. So somehow with all force, we want to stop such deaths and make sure that no one suffers from hungry or shelter, homeless. And many state governments have come up with the policy, because there are certain issues which states has to act and national government can act together, and especially rent from the migrant laborers who are staying in main cities, and we and the financial institution for that matter, whatever the loans are there, they have extended the taking the loan amount from the loanees. And there are many steps have been taken from the national government, and instructions have been issued to the states as well as the local administrations. And in fact, from Niti Aayog, we have asked all the 732 district magistrates to work at the local level with the CSOs or NGOs or the organizations which are at the grassroots level helping the people. And in this way, we are closely working and inviting every new organizations to actively participate with us. And in fact, not only the civil society organizations, and also corporates and MSMEs. MSMEs also, you are all aware that Government of India has released packages of around 20,000 crores to MSMEs to ensure that salaries are being paid to the workers. And for Jan Dhan account, as we know that there are 2 installments already released. And I think Prabhat was raising this issue. You see that almost 7,825 crore has been transferred to Jan Dhan account, of benefiting 15.65 crore people in the country, especially women account holders. And this way, and not only that, in addition to that MSME package or this workman packages, the thing is the state, there are certain institutions which are working in the states, so that they have to take proactive. But unfortunately, in some states, there are some lapses. These institutions are working very lethargic manners. That's why we have sensitized the state agencies also to ensure to meet the especially workmen related issues, and especially workmen boards in the states. They have huge amount of funds. You know that many states, they're collecting cess from the workmen, and they're just keeping it. That money is going on increasing. So that we have told them to release the disaster packages to all the workmen who are enrolled under their boards. And in fact, for the government has already released funds to the state government under disaster relief fund. Huge amount has been released, and we have asked the state governments to release funds to the district administration to ensure that at the ground level there should not be any problem for the people. So unfortunately, yes, Ratish, there are some issues. People should understand that government, they have to have some faith, because some people, you know that there is huge migrant laborers in the country who are still, there are some people who have faith in the government and they're staying in the main cities. But some segment of people, I don't know what the message has been passed on to them, but unfortunately they're going on walk to their native places. This is something like a very unexpected situation, and every state government is meeting their requirements. We've asked the states to meet their requirements and provide food. And in fact, I should appreciate that civil society is really doing wonderful job, because every day we monitor, and PMO also monitor what the CSOs are doing in the ground. And this is a really remarkable and tremendous job has been done by the civil society organizations. And government is concerned. Government is also taking all needed efforts. Maybe this is you can take the national government, MHA, and the state welfare organizations. And if come to the your two questions, progress and challenges in delivering of DBT. Yeah, you know that I was the part of the DBT mission when it was started in 2013, because this is the recommendation came in the 12th five-year plan, so that there are a huge amount of subsidies has been released to the subsidy amount normally it used to go to the agencies earlier. So we thought that because I was there with the planning commission and as well as Niti Aayog for quite many years. So the thing is, we are coming across whatever the money we are releasing to the agencies, that somehow there are a lot of leakages we had the experience in the past. So that we have come up with the modalities like DBT, direct benefit transfer, so that the fund, whatever the money has been released from the government of India, should go directly to the bank account of the people who are the end beneficiaries. This way, you know that Aadhaar has come on the way, and you know that mobile JAM Trinity initiatives, it has been taken so that Jandan mobile through technology, the fund can be transferable to the end beneficiaries, and make sure that end beneficiaries should not suffer from any kind of obstacles. In this way, government is taking all needed steps, and definitely we should appreciate the civil society organizations and the corporates, as well as we have tapped even the UN bodies also to guide us, including WHO, World Bank, UNICEF, UNDP. All we are at the national level very closely working on day-to-day basis. We are taking initiatives, required steps to address the people's problems. And my request to civil society organizations are that please counsel people. They can stay wherever they are, as Prime Minister has assured that all needed support can be extended to them, and we are providing them. But unfortunately, people mindset has to change. In that way, civil society organizations can definitely contribute much more. So with this, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And I think one is the scale of problem is large, and as you said, it's also it is the current maturity of our solutions to the crisis that we are dealing with. And I think we're all playing on the same side. But thank you so much for sharing the governance perspective as well. I think we spent the last 1 hour really in some sense outlining the problem and highlighting some of the challenges that we have. I want to use the next about 50 minutes that we have to take questions from the audience that have come in, but also to specifically focus on solutions. I think some of these problems are tougher problems, but I think it still will be great to get the points of the experts around some of the solutions that we called out for. So I'd love to get Rajiv to come in on the universalization idea, Rajiv, in terms of how do you see that actually pan out? I'd love to have Shikha share a little bit more about the urban governance models. Are there ways in which we can make that happen in reality? Muniraj sir, you talked a lot about decentralization at the district level, state level. What are your recommendations on how do we do that well, and how can we do that more effectively, etc.? I'd also love to have, Mr. Prabhat come in that as well, in terms of how do we set this up in the rural level. Also want to get these thoughts on technology and how can technology play a role here, and take a couple of more questions from the audience and so on. Rajiv, I'll come to you first. You talked about universalization as an approach to say, let's look at, the urban migrant poor as a larger population rather than look at a targeted approach. If you were to do it, and if, given the current funding of about $1 billion that the World Bank is looking at for social security right now, what are some tangible recommendations you would have on what we do next? How do we make that happen going forward?
Okay, Ratish, thank you. So, we've been thinking about this, and actually the idea of universalization is not new. If we go back to a very seminal piece of work which was done in 2006 and 7, which is the NCEUS report, which made very substantial recommendations on responding to the unorganized sector workers in the country. Universalization has been talked about since then, and in provisioning of social security. What it means in current context is that we do away with domicile-related restrictions, which means that regardless of where people come from, their entry into social security offerings should not be disallowed. Okay, so you could be a worker from Odisha, and you should be able to access ration in Surat. Okay, you may be a resident, you might have your resident proof only from Uttar Pradesh, but you must be able to enter shelter homes and access subsidized housing schemes in Mumbai, right? So the first principle there is to do away with this whole interstate kind of restrictions on around accessing schemes. Okay, it's a very significant one because this is how large numbers of people get denied what is rightfully theirs. They're finally contributing to the destination economy, to the destination kind of prosperity. There's no reason to exclude them, except the fact that they are not part of the political kind of enrollment, and we have to do away with that by legislation that people should be able to access. Fortunately, technology exists today to make that happen. That it is possible to use technology to identify people from one location in another and ensure that there is no duplication happening. And even if duplication happens, it's for what we are talking about is maybe not be that severe.
Yeah.
Secondly, identification. We tie ourselves in knots in proving who is the person to reach this service to. I would say that we put the faith in the power of self-attestation, in the power of self-certification, okay, that let people certify that they are workers, that they are part of the informal economy, which means that their attestation, their own their own certification should be seen as valid. It can be verified. It can be verified by facilitation centers, by workers' organizations, by trade unions, by some tripartite body. But let us at least begin from people coming forth to identify themselves. We leave identification and enrollment to employers, which does not happen. Look at ESIC. If you talk to our friends in Gurgaon, Manesar, who run this beautiful initiative called Safe in India, they'll tell you that ESIC hugely excludes people. Most workers who get ESIC benefits are getting it on the day of the accident because they're being enrolled post-accident. What a scandal! It's because the employers are under no punitive threat to present and identify people. So I strongly vote for self-attestation. Let people do it themselves. Thirdly, and I'll stop there. I mean, these are principles. We'll have to put them in practice, and we need kind of structures in place and so on for to be able to do this. Is to ensure that provisioning, that allocations, especially in cities, are made keeping in mind that there is a large number of unenumerated population. Okay, which means that there are these uncounted people who need water, who need toilets, who need housing, who need ration, who need transportation, and provisioning is legitimately made, right? It means that current system of mapping people where they are has to change from looking at proof of residences to where people are spatially located, to recognizing their presence in the city as legitimate, which means if you're living 6 months in a public park, then you're part of the city, right? Or if you're under a pavement, then you're a city dweller. To rethinking, location specific accessibility and inclusion in cities especially, right? It'll open out and legitimize people's presence in cities. It is in these domains, I think, where we must revisit the recommendations of the NCOS report. The draft Social Security Bill actually diluted it by actually not including universal access, by creating criteria for inclusion that actually go against the idea of universal access. And I think those principles have to be applied rapidly, not leisurely in our cities and in our labor markets. Thank you.
Thanks, Rajiv. And I think, and I have to point out, and I think underlying a lot of what you're saying is an acceptance of the legitimacy of the migrant worker in the city. And not just at the administrative level, but also among us. I think there is always a sense of who belongs here rightfully and who doesn't. And when you talked about the person in the pavement and the person in the park, and I think that's one of the questions that fundamentally is a paradigm shift in the way we look at migrants as well. So thank you for bringing that up. I think it's very related to the point Shikha brought up, and Shikha, I'd love to bring you in. You talked about urban governance models that include migrants in the conversation. And I think even in the chat, there was a question of how do you kind of make that happen? How do you make that real on the ground? Are there very tangible suggestions you have on how do we bring in migrants who don't have a sense of permanence in a particular city, part of a governance process so that it's effective?
Yeah, thanks, Ratish. It is a challenge. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it is something that is doable. And bringing in migrants firstly, and if we have more I'm not just yes migrants specifically, but also the whole gamut of urban poor. Having an inclusive participatory governance will bring in transparency and accountability, which is right now missing in a lot of the urban policy making, the urban scheme delivery that happens. And how do we get migrants involved in it? We have to have community-based organizations and recognition of community-based organizations. I would like to give an example of the work that we are doing in Orissa, where they are very where the law empowers, the law sets out actually setting up of slum dwellers associations. So, and this does not have any reference to the number of years or the amount of time that a person has been resident in that slum. And the government there is now moving in to having these slum dwellers association. I'm not saying we continue with slums. I'm saying there needs to be these organizations, these grassroots level, community level organizations, which need to be recognized and given a voice in the city administration. So in Orissa now the plans are to have representatives of the SDA given representation in the ward level committees. The government is also looking at enacting a law which will place some of the funds that are allocated for urban infrastructure to be spent as per the decision of the SDAs, of the Slum Dwellers Association. There is an Urban Employment Guarantee Act that the government of Orissa has passed, which says in the wake of the COVID and lockdown, and the law is basically covering a period from April to September, but looking at urban infrastructure to be created, and the lead role in creating that urban infrastructure is going to be taken by the Slum Dwellers Associations again. So when we're looking at issues like that, we needn't have a Slum Dwellers Association, but we need to have at the last mile, we need to have people's representation, people's groups, recognition of those groups and their voice in the local governance that is happening. I understand in Kerala, they have something called migrant link workers. So you need to have those kind of, those mechanisms where needs of migrants can be communicated to the urban local authorities, can be representative, they are participating in it, and there is, their representation, their needs are getting addressed. And, in future pandemics, in future, God forbid, future urban disasters that happen, their needs can be addressed. There is a social security, net that can be provided through these associations. We are already looking in some parts of the country at public spaces which are allocated or open spaces in the city to be allocated for migrant housing. And those are comprehensive. I mean, they address all needs of migrants in that kind of housing. So I'm saying that these are some of the solutions that can come up. The need, basically, I think the solution lies in having those representation at the grassroots level and their participation in a city level planning process that happens. Of course, a big gap right now is the fact that we don't have data. We don't really know how many migrants, how many urban poor, but all of that I think can be addressed if we start looking at solutions like this.
Got it.
Thank you, Ratish.
think bring up from what you said and then build on to the next question on decentralization. I think you brought up the example of Kerala, and I'm from that state. And one of the things that people often miss while talking about effectiveness of Kerala is really just the effectiveness of decentralization that's happened in that state. And Prabhati, when you brought up inclusion, exclusion errors and verification, you talked about how it can happen a lot more locally because there is that context. And Muniraju sir, when you spoke as well, you talked about how from state to central decentralization, central to district, and talking to DMs, etc. Again, any concrete recommendations you have on how we can implement decentralization of social protection better? What is the role that we can establish for a district magistrate, district collector, or a ward level authority or a city level authority to do this well, rather than leaving this at the level of a state or a center? I wanted to know if you had any suggestions and recommendations on that. And I'd probably want to start with Muniraju, sir, and then move on to Prabha.
Yeah, well, Ratish, it's like this. We have a huge number of social protection schemes. So you take from the education, from health side, and there are a large number of schemes are being implemented by the union government. It may be scholarships related, it may be subsidy related, it may be educational promotion related, and national fellowships. There are a lot of fellowships are being given from union government. And some of the schemes you are maybe aware that there are centrally sponsored schemes and central sector schemes. The thing is, centrally sponsored schemes, wherever they are, there is some kind of contribution from the state. It may be 80% from the center and 20% from the state, and some cases 60-40. It just depends upon the nature of the scheme. It may be, if it is in the core of the core scheme, there will be 100% contribution from the union government, and if it is core schemes, there will be a matching contribution. It's not matching, it's like 80-20, and so general schemes, there are 60-40. This way we have classified based on the requirements and how the state can able to contribute. And especially there are some states where revenue generation is not, especially northeastern states and hilly states like Himalayan states. So there we have made it to 90-10 contributions. Well, social protection is concerned to say that a large number of programs, I'll just mention some of them.
Muniraju sir, just in the interest of time, I want to also see if we can specifically look at the decentralization question.
Yeah.
And then see if you have any suggestions on that.
Okay, decentralization is concerned, you see, actually this cash transfer schemes are concerned, union government wants to directly transfer the benefits. It may be, so under social protection itself, cash transfer schemes. For example, this only thing we assign the task to the district administration or the local administration is the verification of the bank beneficiaries. Because sometimes some agencies which we enroll for the enrollment of the grassroots beneficiaries, there will be some kind of mismatch, or maybe some frauds may happen. There, what we do, under the central sector scheme, we want to ensure that direct benefit go and reach to the end beneficiaries. There, what we see, we want verification by the district or local administration. And that some schemes where the district administration can implement, that funds we are transferring directly to the district administration by decentralizing all other authorities. For example, the current situation is concerned, we have asked the fund transfer system it's going to from center to state treasury and state treasury to district treasury and district to local administration. This takes a lot of time. So to reduce all this time consuming thing and leakages, what we are doing, we are directly releasing funds to the district administration, where the district magistrate can take a decision based on the local requirements. In this way, there are a lot of initiatives are being taken, and definitely technology, we are making use of all technical technologies to ensure that there should not be any leakages or drawbacks on the flow of the funds to the local administration. And we insist upon, there are a lot of funds are given to the district administration, to identify the local needs, and we authorize them to implement certain local based requirement programs. In this way, decentralization, we are giving a lot of push, and Panchayat Raj institutions definitely, they have their own important role to play. And now you know that Panchayat Raj institutions are coming up with a lot of initiatives also. So in this way, government is easing the entire business process to ensure that local are more powerful.
Got it. Thank you, sir. I want to come to Prabhat. Prabhat, I don't know if you have anything to add to what Dr. Muniraju said around the way we can look at a decentralized model for social protection.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic question, and of course Dr. Muniraju kind of mentioned some points. But one really unfortunate trend that we have seen in a major crisis situation like this is to move away from the trend of decentralization towards centralization, and that's dangerous. I think the trend that we had started with 73rd Amendment about Panchayati Raj, I think that needs to be further strengthened. I'll give you an example. Let's say there's a household in a village in Bihar or Rajasthan who is receiving remittance from somebody who is working outside in Surat every month. Now that family is food secure, it doesn't have income problem, right? But suddenly that remittance has stopped coming. Now how do you detect that? It can only be detected if that information is available locally, and the local people, like local panchayat, has the power to decide, okay, suddenly this family has become vulnerable because the remittance income has stopped. Or there's a carpenter in Bihar. He was, as a carpenter, earning decent income, like 400, 300 rupees a day. Suddenly he has got paralyzed and he can't do his carpentry job. So when you have centralized decision making, these kind of vulnerabilities get left out, which come sudden and which need to be addressed very, very locally. So that's why, in non-profit sector, we have things like, say, participatory wealth ranking. You go to the people, you go to a village and ask people that out of the 200 households in this village, which are the 20 which are most vulnerable and why? And they will be able to tell you. So you have to trust people's judgment. You have to trust that, if you go to the village, they would really, want the most vulnerable and poorest people in the village to get help first before their own turn comes. They're pretty honest, and we have to kind of trust their intelligence and their honesty. I represent Grameen Foundation, an entire Grameen model of microfinance, which has helped hundreds of millions of people around the world, is based upon that, leveraging people's information about each other's financial lives. So you have a group of 5 women who know about each other, and then they okay, I know that this person is really needy, this person has a good credit risk, and that's how this entire system has worked. So I think we need to go back to that and strengthen that decentralized system much more.
Thanks, Prabhat. I think I just want to highlight, as I'm listening to you and Shikha and Muniraju sir, it is clear that there is a need for a blended framework in some sense that provides a structure for the civil society organizations to come in, and work effectively in this model. That's number one. And 2 is finds a way of creating the right sort of like the paradigm in some sense at the local level, which I think from a very top-down perspective looks very different from a bottom-up view. And how we make that meet and how we kind of have that come together, I think is going to be one critical challenge. I want to take a couple of questions before I go back to Adi, the question I had on technology, because there are at least 3 questions here that I think are very important. One is Nancy, who's asked a question around the role of companies, in terms of investing in, because like we said earlier, and I think Shikha touched upon this as well, it is the agency of the worker, the ability of the system, but also the role of the employer. Shikha, I don't know if you want to take this question and share some of your thoughts on that. And then next, I would probably go to Sameer's question on the list. Yeah. Shikha?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Very well, Shikha. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I would like to speak from our experience of working with employers in the construction industry, and how is their buy-in into this. One is that we are all aware of the Building and Construction Workers Welfare Board, where the construction industry gives us cess. In our work with the construction industry, we found that, when you're working with the employers on site and helping them provide services, and they are able to see that, see the impact of that in the worker retention that happens. The construction industry actually has a kind of a turnover of every 3-4 months. They have a fresh set of workers coming in, going, and the contractors bringing in. So what has been there is there is a clear need to demonstrate to employers the benefits that comes to them with giving these with this kind of support that they are able to extend to the workers. So the employers, there is always that thing at the back of their mind that, oh, we are giving this cess, but what is it that we are getting in return? We worked on site, on construction sites, where we helped companies, construction industries work with their team to register workers with the BOCW, ensure they get those benefits, and also help. We've also been working with employers, and we've realized that quite a few employers also realize the importance of transparency that comes in. We've been working with employers to have wages paid into bank accounts. Help in this whole building the financial literacy of workers on site. The companies are able to see the benefits that come out of it, that accrue to them out of workers, out of a more transparent system. And especially, I would like to bring out the example of what has happened recently in the post-COVID lockdown scenario in the construction sites that we worked in. In all of those sites that worked where workers were registered with BOCW with the support of the construction companies, most workers have preferred to stay on site. They've got support from the employers for a meal. There's also provisions, and this I'm talking about in Maharashtra, for rations or food to be given to workers who are registered with BOCW, and this is coming to workers on site. So there is employer buy-in, and the need is to find what it is that the employer really needs, and to kind of put those pieces of the puzzle together to make the employer realize what the benefits are there for them. And then from the construction sector, I would like to give an example of another, which is very, very which is generally a gray area in the terms of employer and how they treat. And this has been our example of working with Brickins, where we have worked with Brickins, where employers have provided space and worked with us. So it's basically, I think the answer to the riddle lies in making employers realize what is the benefits that will accrue to them out of providing access to entitlement benefit to workers who are there on site, in terms of retentions, in terms of better worker cooperation, and they also realize benefits like they are looking now at on-site skilling. So all those things are there. I think it's just that we need to devise a model that works, and we've been fairly successful with this model that we started out with in one, and now we are planning, and there scaling up to multiple construction sites across the country.
Yeah, thank you, Shikha. Thanks for sharing that. And I think it's an important point that you're bringing up, in terms of demonstrating value. And, Satwa, as we briefly discussed before, as well as worked in the space as well. And Tanya had a question on improved productivity. And in some sense, the story is the longer the worker stays, the better, the higher the retention, but also the improved productivity. And I think it's also important to look at the developer for sure, but also the chain above the developer, including financing, because I think Bhupendra also talks about, looking at debt and equity capital to look at migrant worker issues. And there are models that can be established to be able to do that. So I think thanks for bringing that up. I want to take the question that Samir, has around the responsibility of source states and the destination state. And Rajiv, I hope you're still there. I'd love to have you take this question because you've been working in Rajasthan, looking at, which has been a source state to both Gujarat and Maharashtra. And it is true that today the migrant worker is left alone in a lurch between the source state and the destination state. How do you see the role of the source state in enabling protection to the workers? And you talked about the destination state earlier, but it'd be great to hear some thoughts on the source side as well.
Okay, that's interesting because I think a lot of the migrant problem narrative seems to be focusing on cities, on the urban reality. And I think there is a lot to be said about what could be done from where they come from. And usually if you see the states that are sending large numbers out, states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, these are states which have kind of embedded poverty. These are not, they're suffering endemic kind of issues in providing employment, in providing returns to rural population. So one thing that is suggesting itself, which is a little bit aspirational, is for states to kind of revisit their own rural development and their rural economic revival kind of plans. Yeah, if can we look at employment again at the source end, so that people's choices are not driven by distress, but by some sense of opportunity. I know it's a big ticket one, because these are not short-term measures; they are long-term, they are structural in nature. But at least the opportunity is raising its head again. That let's look at that for sure. But what is something more immediate that source states must do? Firstly, we have the most immediate thing, which is food and Narega, and we must absolutely invest and purposefully make sure that employment is being generated, food is being reached. At least social protection is in place for people, especially those who have come back. But in the slightly longer term, I think there is a case for fixing, firstly, on the data side, ensuring that we understand how many people are migrating out, not see it as a problem, but see, at least put the data in perspective so that a policy around areas that are sending large numbers could be put in place. Typically, such areas that send large numbers out will be areas that are not just poor, but they also have a kind of a governance kind of disruption. Their health centers are not working, their schools are not working, their roads are in bad repair, their infrastructure is a problem, their Anganwadis are, depopulated. I think identifying clusters of high sending areas and then treating these areas as a special case area by source governments becomes really important. Secondly, ensuring that there is some documentation of, again, through a process of self-attestation and not through using tools that identify people, but by self-attestation, creating databases of workers which can then be shared with destination states, okay? Which means there's some data exchange between source and destination locations. Thirdly, ensuring that we start appointing and locating empowered officials in destination locations from source states. If Gujarat had a empowered Odia resident commissioner or somebody from Rajasthan, the state of migrants from these states in Gujarat would have been quite different. So establishing this kind of arrangement between source and destination as a proactive step from the source state becomes, I think, quite critical and quite important. Monitoring, really hapless and distressed kind of migration, monitoring child trafficking, monitoring women's migration, monitoring, and documenting forms of forced work, debt bondage related work is all possible at the source end, right? These are things which are easier done here than in the cities. And I think these are the kind of systems that need to become more active. And finally, ensuring that people have legal aid, they have legal protection, they're going with legal tools, and have the assurance that the state that they're going from will come and stand by in case of wage denials, in case of injuries, in case of bondage that they experience when they travel out. So there's a lot of work that can be done at the source end, both administratively, structurally, and in terms of kind of support to migrants who are migrating out.
Thanks, Rajiv. It's extremely comprehensive, and I think especially the resident commissioners, somebody who finds themselves accountable for the source migrants in the destination state and has a voice in the agency to be able to do something about it, providing to some of those locations where there is such a challenge in fixing the social infrastructure there, I think is very, very critical. I want to move to Adi. Adi, you've had the chance to, in some sense, look at technology and its application to social challenges. overall, but you've also had the opportunity to understand grassroots realities and the problems that people face through the Gramvani work that you do. I'd love to hear from you, seeing the discussions that we had so far around targeting, around reach, around the last mile challenges you highlighted. Are there any concrete recommendations you have on where technology can actually add a significant value in streamlining the delivery of social overall? And any suggestions?
Yeah. One of my main points, right? I mean, coming from a technology background myself, right? We've all tend to sometimes see technology as a silver bullet that is going to really transform everything. But there's some very, very important things that I've seen everybody missing in so many of the technology-driven, including JAM, so many things that are around here. One thing that people miss out is that they think technology is infallible, which is not true. Biometrics, for example, keep failing every now and then. Network connectivity keeps failing now and then. And the problem that happens is that these failure cases are not dealt with properly. And the onus also for how to fix these errors, right? That process isn't thought through. So if there are biometric failures happening, then of course, where the default is that the onus is on the person that, okay, you need to go and re-register for biometrics. But again, that's not straightforward, right? On the other hand, there are logs at UIDAI, in the PDS system in every place, right? Where we know, right, for whom is biometrics failing. So some more proactive, decentralized methods can be evolved, right? Lists can be generated. It can be sent to the panchayats that, okay, these are the people for whom problems are happening on the technology side. Can you approach them and can you try to fix them? And again, right, so it's a combination of decentralization that everybody has been talking about, but tying it together with the technology. So that's one key point that very often we miss out, that when we dream of technology, we don't think about the failure cases and how to address them. I think one other point which people tend to miss out is on appropriate design of the technology also. So for example, we've been doing a lot of work with industrial workers, and a Provident Fund has been one of the issues that we've been dealing with. And so we've had so many countless number of people who are not able to withdraw their Provident Fund because the employer, when they were filling out their forms, they entered the names incorrectly, or even the gender, in fact, right? So it is all just careless data entry, but the gender has gone incorrectly, date of birth, date of joining. And because of that, they're not able to withdraw, right? Well, first of all, there's also a lot of lack of awareness how to withdraw. Many people don't even know their PF account numbers, but right, the point is that the onus over here lies on the employer to fix those errors. So now you can imagine the power differential in which this technology is expected to operate. That the worker is the one who has to go to his employer. Well, if they're working over there, maybe they might still have a say. But then a lot of this is also with ex-employers who just don't care. So there is a need to rethink how we think about technology. Everything needs to be user-originated, worker-originated. So for PF, for example, going back to also the self-assessment point that Rajiv was making, right? That why can't the worker initiate all this? And then maybe it goes back to the employer for a verification or something, but right, not to be originated by the employer, because it doesn't work that way. Similarly, with ration shops and banking correspondence, over there, the person who is wielding the technology, right? It is that person who, to a large extent, even they may not really understand how the technology works, but at least the consumer, they're even further away. The person can say anything, and the consumer wouldn't really know, right? Whether it's the technology failing, what steps should be taken. So very simple things can be done. That these POS machines, for example, can be audio enabled. That every transaction that is happening, that is spoken out automatically by the machine. When an error happens, the error is described, right? A process is described, that who is responsible for the error, what should be done. So it is these sort of simple things also which are about the technology design, right? Where we need to really understand the context in which the technology is being used. Because otherwise, yeah, the technology might work for many cases, right? The cash transfers have happened, right, in the millions. But then there are also millions where it's not happened, right? For many of these reasons. So, so that appropriate design of the technology is very critical. And ultimately the technology also, right, it has to tie in with all the rest of the processes. So with denials of, right, that just because people didn't have ration cards or people weren't able to enroll into these schemes properly. So what sort of processes can be developed to make that simpler? And again, it has to be decentralized. There's no other way to scale up a system unless it is decentralized. So panchayats, for example, should be tasked with regular surveys to bring in families into PDS. Lists should be generated where technology is failing, and again the panchayats and civil society and others should work on these lists to address some of these issues. So so my broader point basically is that designing technology is not straightforward. It can't be done sitting in the lab. It has to be done by understanding the context, by understanding the power differentials between who should operate the technology, who should not operate the technology. It has to be tested before it is rolled out at a mass scale where everybody is expected mandatorily to use something. So those are some of the big gaps I've seen over the years on technology design itself, right? That it needs to be lot more thoughtful than what it is right now.
Got it. So I completely agree, Adi, and I think the point you make about the person being at the center of it, like technology as a way of empowering the person to be able to achieve some of these benefits. I think even the simple thing that you talked about, audio enabling, because then the person knows what's going on. And you earlier talked about financial literacy, and I think the point about technology literacy, and at least to the level of being a user, I think is a very, very critical point as well. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I probably have one question from my side, then take a few questions from the audience. Muriraju sir, this is one of the most enduring social protection mechanisms that we've had is the PDS system. Like I remember my childhood standing in the queue for ration for my own house. And you talked about leakages earlier, and it's one of the biggest problems in PDS today still. I mean, we still don't have a model that is robust there, but we recognize now that it's now more than ever it is required. From the government lens, from the Niti Aayog lens, are there some specific areas that you have in mind in terms of is there a way to make that PDS a stronger and a more robust delivery system? Because it is one of the most critical social protection mechanisms that we have today.
Yeah, Ritesh, it is like this. If you see the National Food Security Act, and under that provisions have been made where district administration can procure the food grains from FCI depots, and FCI, what they do, they capture the data on real-time basis, how much food grains they have distributed to the district administration. Ultimately, you see, whatever the national level systems are there, they are strongly built. In fact, we are not giving much scope for any leakages at the national level institutional mechanism. When it goes to the district administration after procuring the food grains from FCI to the state godowns, and from state godowns that has been distributed across the PDS shops. And there now we have made it Aadhaar mandatory, and now ration cards are being nationalized. Wherever they are there, they can procure rations from any states where even for the facilitating this migrant labors, so that showing their ration card and their Aadhaar number, or now we are pushing the technology to capture the mobile number and distribute the ration at the root level and feed the information. And in fact, just it's a matter of last few days discussions where PM Annapurna, some sort of program where by giving the mobile number itself, we can give the ration at least minimum 5 kilo per person. If it is a family of 3, there is 15 kilos per month. Food grains has to be given like that. We are thinking on that, and definitely maybe we have engaged many Microsoft and other technical organizations to build up some sort of technology to capture the distribution at the PDS shops on real-time basis, how much food grains. And we have FCI is capturing entire data of how much food grains they have distributed to different district administrations and state procurement agencies, including the district administration. So in that way, definitely technology is one of the things where we can capture the real-time data and how much food grains have been distributed, how much they have distributed to the end beneficiaries. This way we are working on, and maybe another few days, some more steps can come up. Atish.
Thank you. And we look forward to that, Raj. I think it is going to be a very critical component for us to establish and ensure robustness. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think I want to take two questions from the audience that have come in. One is conscious in our conversation so far is the absence of our discussions around farmers. We've talked about migrants, we've talked about the rural poor in general, we've talked about Manrega schemes and so on, but we haven't talked about farmers particularly, and we touched upon farmer suicides in the video. In the light of the current crisis and given some of the large-scale logistics disruptions that we are facing, and in general looking at the approach government's taken towards farmers, around looking at social protections for farmers, are there things that we could do better from a farmer lens? I have some thoughts on this, but I want to pause and I want to see if any of the panelists want to take that question around what we can do differently in terms of social protection for the farmers and what are some of the critical priorities that we have to take care of them.
So I just like to add here. See, we have asked the state governments to take some decision, and PM Kisan is one of the major programs where we are compensating in case of loss of crops, and there are some states have already announced the packages for the farmers. Maybe like farmers who are growing the flowers. There are some perishable items of agriculture products. So there, maybe Karnataka, they have come up with 25,000 rupees package per acre who's growing the flowers, and similarly vegetable growers and all. So this way, some states have radically taken some steps to extend benefit or cover the loss to the farmers. In that way, states are more active, and definitely national government is encouraging the best practice followed by some states, states to other states to follow the similar steps. And recently, we are monitoring what steps have been taken by the states for different sectors, including maybe it's the workers, it's maybe laborers, it may be farmers, it's maybe women and different kind of people who are engaged in different activities like handicrafts or maybe barbers, maybe vendors, maybe auto rickshaw pullers, auto drivers, and all these categories of people. There are some states have come up with some packages to them, and that fund has been given directly to their accounts. So that way, we are actively working, and definitely we can see that in case of any other problems are coming up, we can address properly.
Absolutely. Prabhat, do you have anything to add to that? I saw you reach out to the mute button.
Yeah, I mean, just what Dr. Muniraju is saying, that some states have started some schemes to compensate farmers who could not sell their produce, like flower growers. So yeah, I mean that's a genuine problem. I think instead of keeping it state specific, at the national level, we need to see how we compensate the farmers, especially those who were in the perishable commodities. Like this is the mango season, but in the markets you can't see mangoes, and the mango producers are not able to sell their mangoes. Similarly about fruits and vegetables. So there's so many things. So in the short term, of course, what you need to do is to compensate them, financially, give them just conditional cash grants. But in the long term, there's also a systemic need that is there, which is that if you had better infrastructure of cold storage and warehousing, then at least some of these things are not perishable in a day. They can have a shelf life of several weeks, only if we have the right infrastructure. So that again reinforces the need to invest in that infrastructure, because that has been a perennial problem. We grow as much of fruits and vegetables today in the country as the food grain, over 300 million tons, and 40% of it gets wasted before it's being consumed. So I think that's a problem that has been long-standing and needs to be addressed.
If I could jump in, Ratish.
Yes, please. Sorry.
So that's I think these problems around farm sector again are deeper and structural in nature, and a lot of what ought to have been done earlier needs to still be done, including fixing reinvent agriculture and market linkages and price guarantee and so on. In all of this discussion around informal workers, I think the vast number of agriculture workers, agriculture laborers actually has got, I think, somewhat has not been paid enough attention. And this is a vast workforce which is severely underpaid, usually below minimum wages. It has very exploitative kind of relationships with landowners, and they are very distressed kind of category of people. And I think there is a need to revisit policies around agriculture workers and laborers in a way to protect their basic minimum wage rights and their employment and kind of upgrading their employment relations in the agrarian economy. Let's remember that these are not urban workers. They are actually rural to rural workers, and they are people who are within the state usually. So they're intra-state workers. They're not traveling from, of course, there are several examples of interstate movement as well, but a large number of agriculture workers are actually from within. So there is possibly more political kind of, endorsement to improving their conditions. And I think it's a group that needs, within the agrarian kind of economy, it needs attention at this time.
Great. We have 4 minutes on the clock. I still have a ton of questions that I can ask all the panelists here around MSMEs, for example. How do we look at it? That is a question that was pending. I think there was a great question from the audience about how mental health should become an integral part of our social protection thinking today for workers. And I think it's a very valid point. We talk about health and might miss the mental health aspect, which now in the current reality has become a lot more relevant. How do we provision an infrastructure that provides mental health at scale for workers in general? As part of our thinking, I think that was a very, very interesting question that came up as well. And there are more that I've listed here. And, but I think the key point that I want to highlight, I think at the end of our discussion right now, is that very rarely is the conversation around social protection get such a momentum as it is done today. It is part of our collective consciousness to look at the people that are struggling when things hit the roof. And I think there is, with the World Bank aid coming in, the 20 lakh crore discussion that we are having, etc., there is an opportunity to make some of these critical changes in the system possible today. And for me, a couple of things that I picked up. Number one is shifting from a paradigm of inclusion than a paradigm of exclusion. It's okay to include a few people by mistake, but it's very, very, very poor of us if we exclude a few deserving people. And I think that paradigm being at the center of our thinking. Second is to remove the idea of us, creating a structure where we have to identify people, mark people, etc., but shift to a paradigm where domicile is not important. Self-attestation is a way of targeting people and getting people to receive things. 3, look at the principle of universalization as a way of delivering social protection for people. 4, create a structured framework for civil society to come into the conversation around the delivery of social protection at the decentralized levels. 5 is to establish a more robust, decentralized manner, both in the urban and in the rural areas, to be able to look at social protection and leverage, I think, what Prabhat talked about, community models of trust, than as much central models of trust that always have a risk of exclusion. And last is look at technology as not an end-all solution, but as a critical enabler that is humanized by keeping the person who we are serving at the center of it. I think all of these are, fairly large, and key principles that I think will help us think about the solutions for the future. And I'm sure there are more key insights as well. I want to thank all the panelists for being part of the conversation. You've all been gracious with your experience and expertise. Thank you, everybody. And I hope the audience found this valuable as well, in terms of a discussion. So thanks, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.